Sometime in the spring of 2025, a chip designer at a Chinese semiconductor firm opened their workstation and found the license gone. Not a hardware failure, not a fab shutdown, not a materials embargo. The Electronic Design Automation Suite, the software that translates circuit logic into the physical geometry a foundry can actually cut into silicon, had simply gone dark. That absence lasted roughly 2 months. What it exposed in those 2 months, and what Washington chose to do about it before the window closed, is a tighter choke point than anything yet built in silicon, metal, or trade law. The warning did not come from the fab. It came from the software that draws the chip. Follow the chain from the license blackout through Empyrean Technology's paradox numbers, through the moment Washington blinked, and out to the open question of whether China can close the design tools gap before the next cutoff lands harder and stays longer. In the spring of 2025, the United States Commerce Department barred Synopsys, Cadence, and Siemens from selling electronic design automation software to Chinese customers. This is confirmed, reported across semiconductor trade press at the time. Electronic design automation is not peripheral tooling. It is the step that precedes every other step. A chip begins not in a clean room but in software, where engineers define every transistor, every wire, every timing rule, and every physical constraint that the foundry will later execute. Without that software, nothing downstream can move. A fab with no blueprint is a very expensive building. This is the link the whole chain hangs on. Not the fab node, not the packaging line, not the memory stack. The design layer. A chip that cannot be drawn cannot be built, and every other investment in Chinese semiconductor self-sufficiency sits downstream of that fact. To understand why this particular software is not substitutable on short notice, consider what an electronic design automation suite actually holds after years of use. A chip team's entire workflow, the library of cell models, the verification scripts, the sign-off rules tuned over years of tape-outs, is baked into one vendor's file formats and one vendor's verification logic. Switching suites mid-project is closer to translating a building's architectural drawings into a different country's construction code standards after the foundation is poured. Theoretically possible. Practically a restart. Synopsys, Cadence, and Siemens together write the blueprints for roughly 80 out of every 100 advanced chips designed on Earth. That figure is an analyst consensus estimate predating the ban and has not been formally resurveyed since restoration, so treat it as an order of magnitude reading rather than a hard count. But the directional reality it describes is not in dispute. With Western licenses suspended, Chinese fabs and fabless designers faced a design layer gap they could not route around with hardware substitution or additional capital spending. There is no equivalent of buying a different foundry machine when the bottleneck is the software upstream of all the machines. The domestic name that absorbed the diverted demand was Empyrean Technology, China's leading domestic electronic design automation vendor, and the only domestic firm attempting to offer a full-flow tool suite for advanced nodes. Empyrean's first half 2025 revenue reached roughly 500 million yuan, according to the company's own financial disclosures, as reported in Chinese financial and semiconductor press. That is a substantial number, and in isolation it reads like a success story of domestic substitution under pressure. Then the second number arrives. Over the same period, reported profit fell more than 90%. Revenue up, profit collapsed. This is the most diagnostic figure in the entire episode, and it is the link that the individual reports tend not to connect to the policy story. A margin collapse of that severity at the exact moment a company is absorbing redirected national demand does not look like scaling a proven product. It looks like buying customers at below-cost pricing to hold them in the portfolio, which is a different enterprise entirely. The reported, not independently verified interpretation is that the contracts were won at distress economics because Empyrean's current tool capability cannot meet the requirements of the most advanced nodes Chinese designers are attempting. Winning a contract is not the same as possessing a self-sufficient tool. The 2 months did not create a dependency. They measured one that already existed. One caveat that the chain requires honesty about: the filing does not itemize the margin hit between distress pricing and planned investment spend. It is possible a portion of the profit decline reflects deliberate investment in research and development rather than pure competitive weakness. That breakdown is inferred, not independently verified. The revenue and profit figures themselves are reported from Empyrean's own disclosures. The interpretation connecting the spread to tool inadequacy is the thinnest point of the middle chain. By midsummer 2025, Washington lifted the restrictions. This is confirmed by trade press reporting on the license restoration. Synopsys, Cadence, and Siemens re-entered, and the market returned structurally to its pre-ban posture. And here is where the expectation turns over. The move that was meant to demonstrate the choke point's severity was also the move that preserved the choke point's utility. Lifting the ban kept the dependency intact. A sustained cutoff, held long enough to force genuine domestic substitution, would have accelerated the very capability the ban was designed to suppress. Chinese state investment in electronic design automation research and development would have intensified not at the margins but at the center of national priority. International design teams, some of which operate partly on Chinese commercial relationships, would have accelerated workarounds. Empyrean would have faced a different kind of demand pressure, not distress pricing but existential timeline pressure, backed by state subsidy with no ceiling. The commercial incentive to close the tool gap quickly, rather than slowly, would have been total. By lifting the ban before the 2 months hardened into a permanent posture, Washington preserved something arguably more valuable than the 2 months of disruption itself: the ongoing leverage of a threat that can be redeployed, precisely calibrated, and held in reserve rather than spent. This third call is the most inferred element in the chain and deserves the clearest flag. The documented fact is the timing. The ban came, lasted roughly 2 months, and was lifted. The strategic rationale is not in any public record this account has confirmed. The inferred conclusion that Washington now treats electronic design automation access as a precision instrument rather than a permanent embargo rests entirely on that timing and on what the episode revealed about bilateral exposure. Because the exposure ran both ways. The 3 Western vendors collectively hold a customer base in China large enough that a permanent ban would have restructured their own revenue models over time. Permanently exiting that customer base is not the same as temporarily suspending it. The blink was not weakness. It was, the evidence suggests, a calibration. But that inference has not been confirmed by any documented strategic rationale, and it should be read as reported to inferred, not confirmed. The chain now stands as follows. The 2 confirmed ends are solid. The ban happened, the restoration happened. The middle, where the most consequential question lives, is where the chain is thinnest. Empyrean's numbers are reported, the interpretation connecting them to tool inadequacy is inferred, and the policy logic of the lift is inferred from timing alone. Whether 2 months was long enough to materially accelerate domestic electronic design automation capability, or short enough to leave the dependency undisturbed, is not yet answerable from the evidence available at the time of this account. What the episode did accomplish is measurable. It showed every party in the chain, Chinese planners, Western vendors, and the Commerce Department, exactly how quickly a license suspension translates into design pipeline paralysis. It showed how shallow the domestic alternative remains at advanced nodes. And it showed that the choke point, once identified publicly and tested in operation, is too sharp to hold indefinitely without cutting in both directions. Empyrean's numbers put a number on the gap. The gap between capturing volume and owning capability turned out to be more than 90% of a profit line, at a moment when the company was supposed to be demonstrating that it could substitute for the tools that had just gone dark. The design tools layer is the link the whole chain hangs on. A chip that cannot be drawn cannot be built. Everything else in the Chinese semiconductor investment story, every advanced packaging line, every new foundry node, every memory architecture, sits downstream of the electronic design automation step, and the domestic champion at that step, as of mid-2025, was growing its revenue while watching its margins evaporate, which is the financial shape of a company absorbing a national emergency on commercial terms it cannot sustain. The software came back, the measurements stayed. Watch the next Empyrean earnings release. If the profit margin recovers while revenue holds, that is evidence the gap is narrowing on commercial terms, that Empyrean's tools are meeting more of the advanced node requirement and winning contracts without distress pricing. If revenue keeps climbing and profit keeps falling, the dependency is deepening even as the sales chart looks like progress. Those 2 outcomes are not the same story. One is a chokehold that outlasts every fab China builds. The other is a capability that closes on its own timeline, independent of whether the license comes back or goes dark again. The next cycle will show which one is actually running. If you follow that distinction between sales that signal strength and sales that signal subsidy, subscribe and turn on notifications. That is the layer this channel watches.